I just wanted to talk a little bit about Article 29, which is the good seamanship rule, which means that they were accountable for the maneuver was a starboard helm maneuver, which means that you go to port. You don't go to, when you say starboard helm, the English tiller orders are starboard helm means that your head goes to the left. If you were a Frenchman and you were ordered to starboard your helm, you'd go to the right, which is why Francis Mackay used hand signals, left, right. They didn't even use the words port and starboard in French. They used, droite and gauche, because it was too confusing. So that was a major concern, which I will discuss in a little bit. But I did want to point out one thing. A man named David Wright Smith wrote a book called The Law Relating to the Rules of the Road at Sea. And the rules of the road at sea were written by Marsden, Marsden's Rules of the Road at Sea. And he said this, and I want to make sure I get this just right. He incorporated the phrase that the port maneuver is very rarely, is never rarely the proper maneuver. And that's a law, he's talking about the law of the sea. And when you talk about something as being rarely the proper maneuver, that leaves an area of gray. It's open for discussion. It's not written in stone that a port maneuver is wrong. It's just not, just rarely the proper maneuver, but it's not wrong. There was an issue of the sound that was made when the two boats collided. But the one closest was a man by the name of Edward McCrossan, whose testimony was good for Mont Blanc. But unfortunately with McCrossan, he had a terrible sense of time. And I think that to him, like 20 minutes was 40 minutes, or you know what I'm saying. He just didn't have a good sense of time. What happened with McCrossan was that he went up to watch these things going on, and he said that when Emo went into Mont Blanc, there was no sound. And a number of other people said the same thing. There was no sound. They didn't hear the sound. But a lot of the Supreme Court and the Privy Council believed the testimony of mate Herbert Whitehead, who was on CD 73 at the time, whose testimony was very, very good, very, very believable, and he was a good observer. However, he was in the wrong position. He was down, further down the harbor. He wasn't in a position to see. McCrossan was right there. My theory, I mean, it came up in the summations as well. William Henry could not figure out why there was no sound when these boats collided. Well, the truth is that when you go in at a 90-degree angle, there probably wasn't even a sound. And McCrossan said when these boats touched, they went like this, boom, boom, like that. Maybe not quite as fast, but they touched and then separated. The sound, the rending, the screaming of the iron, the metal, keep bumping into that came from when the boat came out, not when it was going in. And the sparks created from that would have caused the fire in the hold. The gases built up in hold number 1, where Emo struck Mont Blanc, was the actual cause. And because of probably the benzol on the deck, some of the barrels were probably broken, and the benzol seeped down, and the fire was carried up. But that benzol was treated. It was treated so that it took half or twice the amount of heat to fire it up. It wasn't as volatile. The benzol wasn't the cause. The gas in the forward hold from the picric acid. And had the picric acid been all wet, That even might have helped, but there was too much dry picric acid. And I don't know if you've ever seen a picric acid explosion. They found a vial of it in a lab in a high school or in a college somewhere in the States, and they exploded it on their lawn there. They had the SWAT team come in and explain. My gosh, now that's pretty heavy stuff. So it's dangerous when it turns into a powder. When it's wet, it's okay. It's later when it dries, it's very, very volatile, very, very dangerous. That thing should never have been allowed to come up here. The crew, and this really went to why there was so much vilification of these people coming off this boat, the crew of Mont Blanc, the men, the officers, the men, the captain, and the pilot. Well, they didn't know that they had 20 minutes. As far as they were concerned, they had 20 seconds. 2 seconds, who knows? The drag is that when they got off the boat, they were only 90 feet away from the shore, the Halifax shore. People didn't like that. But they knew what was on board, and nobody else did, at least on shore. And 90 feet is not a lot of distance. So they were pretty close before they even jumped ship. And they headed not to shore, but they headed the other way, up towards the cable wharf in Dartmouth, above the brewery. Well, no sailor is going to go ashore where there's buildings. When they know there's going to be an explosion, where there's buildings, they're not going to go into a place where they know where there's more of a chance that they're going to die. I think that Captain Lemedic's main idea was to save his men. That's all he could do. What more could he do? The two men on the left are very interesting. I got this picture. I don't think anybody's ever seen this picture before. It is Lawless Farlow and Horatio Horace Brannan, the two brothers. The Stella Maris, after the collision and the fire started, they came back. They dropped their barges on the Dartmouth side and came back and tried to put out the fire. Well, it was impossible. They had one little hose, didn't work. They came in. They tried to get, there was some room to get between the stern of the Mont Blanc, which had come over on a slack tide. It was slack tide at the time. A slack tide is that the tide can change. Goes one way, it goes another. It's between the tides, the midpoint between high tide and low tide. The boat went over by itself. McCrossan testified that the boat came in as if a pilot had been piloting it. On the left here we have a man. His name is Acting Commander Tom Triggs. He was on the HMS Highflyer, so he took a group in a whaler and they went over to try and put out this fire. Commander Triggs came along and saw that there was no chance that they could fight the fire. All he wanted to do at that point was to get a tow from where they were partway to the Emo. He wanted to check out the situation on board that ship. So Captain Brannan tied a line. He was face in to the pier. He tied a line to the whaler and towed him part way to Emo, not all the way, part of the way, and then they went on their way. Albert Madison. He and I believe 7 others, I have all their names in my book. He had volunteers. They were trying to put out the fire. Rumors of them getting on board, it's possible. When the crew left the ship, they left the falls hanging off the side. Nobody saw, William Nickerson, who was the second mate on the boat on Stella Maris, and Walter Brannan, Horatio Brannan's son, testified that they didn't see anybody on board. Herbert Whitehead said he did. He saw a man in a red sweater on the deck just before she blew. Don't know. They could have got up, the falls were left on the, and they could have climbed up the falls from the water, which makes sense, because they would either have to go on from the pier or from the side. So the falls would have still been there when they had the davits were hanging over. They lowered the boats and the falls were still there. Albert Madison asked Captain Horatio Brannan, if they had a hawser. All they wanted to do, my understanding, and according to the evidence, what they really wanted to do was to just pull the stern of Mont Blanc away from the pier so it wouldn't catch on fire. That's really all they wanted to do. Nobody ever got to secure a line on Mont Blanc because they had pulled out a 5-inch hawser. It was too small. The captain ordered another one. William Nickerson was down in the hold, and they were just getting it out, the 10-inch hawser, and the explosion happened, and it blew Walter Brannan into the hold, punctured his eardrum, and that was that. They never did get a line secured.